So we got the idea of the gatherings from the rainbow gatherings and started to have our own. And the best time of year here for the climate at that time, which of course has changed almost completely since then, was for us to have spring gatherings. So we had several spring gatherings over it was one family owned what we used to call the Mattole property. The man's name took the name of the Mattole River, and was right where the Mattole goes under the bridge in Edwardsburg near French's. And so we had several gatherings there. Some people brought their horses. People came from Harris, from Whale Gulch, of course. A lot of musicians in Whale Gulch, belly dancers, and it was a great group of people that our tribe was at that time, and then new people came. Lee Ostro came from San Francisco, who was a musician and gathered musicians and brought musicians. He eventually created a music label. Right now I can't remember the name of it, but and more music people started coming. And then the money was raised after the fire hall burned down in Garberville. Money was raised to build a hall in Redway, where the property occurred. The opportunity presented itself, and Carol Bruno and several other women at the time put on the first what became Reggae on the River. I don't remember what year that was exactly, but it was called Rock on the River. Rock and Roll on the River, something like that, and it was a much smaller thing, of course, and then that though started to gain momentum and became an annual thing also, which became Reggae on the River. So at a certain point, people were starting to make money growing marijuana. I, for one, and I think a lot of the original hippies that came up here really weren't thinking about making money. We were able to live on welfare. We were willing to live on minimal incomes, because you really can't live on welfare unless you're living in the hills in a shack or a tent. But we were willing to do that because we rejected primarily the war in Vietnam, and that was the thing of our generation, men or women. The women lost a lot of their husbands and boyfriends, or went themselves. Not as many women went in those days, but a lot of men didn't come back, and a lot of men that came back were permanently disabled. I had some friends from college days that sent ears back that they had cut off of people that they had murdered. And this was a trauma. This was a trauma that cursed our nation, the wars. And then, as I mentioned before, when the National Guard got to the point of shooting students in this country, that's when we knew that we had to start a new culture. And we didn't know exactly what it was going to be, but we were going to start with nothing. And if we had to stay that low, to stay peaceful and honest and retain our integrity and our spirit and our oneness with the Great Spirit, that's what we would do. And we called it voluntary simplicity. And We were all from middle-class families primarily. So, you know, you might say, well, it's easy to give up those things if you've had them once. I can't really speak to that, you know. It hasn't been difficult to give them up. The hardest thing is watching the marijuana in our culture become a cash commodity. That's been one of the hardest things to deal with. We lived in a utopia here. People came here from all over the world to work in this industry because we knew it was an industry, because the police couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't do anything about it. As a matter of fact, the first summer that I lived up here, the sheriff in Mendocino County went on the radio. KMFB, I think, was the only radio station we could get that was anywhere close to locally. Went on the radio and said, we can no longer pay attention to any marijuana grows that are less than 50 pounds. Well, that's like telling people you can grow up to 50 pounds. we got an average of 1 pound per plant in those days. So you could grow up to 50 plants. That's what the sheriff in Mendocino told us. So some of us went way more than that. Some of us realized for the first time that we could actually buy a new truck. Not a new truck, but a truck where we could actually do something. And so we started to make a little money. I didn't pursue that myself. I was on a disability. I grew a few pounds to smoke and to share with my friends. But at any rate, so money was created, and the kids were getting a little bit older. They were ready to go to elementary school, like an actual elementary school, 5th, 6th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. We had a school teacher that lived on the property who was our school teacher. She got a job at Skyfish at Beginnings, and our kids started to go to Beginnings, so people started to want to move into town. And they had the money to buy, some of the people had money to buy homes in town. And so, again, not to say all the women, but a number of the women started to move into town. So as our kids got to be like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and needed a little more social interaction, our teacher, Sue Powell, who was an accredited teacher, and was our teacher in Fire Creek, got a job at Skyfish, the elementary school at Beginnings, and so she would take all our kids into town with her in the morning, and it worked out great. But then at a certain point, I was able to rent a room in Bryceland area. It had gotten to the point where, with camp, I hadn't mentioned camp before. So camp was the campaign against marijuana planting. And when George Bush the First came into power, he launched a program called Green Sweep, which was centered out in the Gulch and Shelter Cove areas, but brought in helicopters, military, and it was like an armed assault. You know, basically there were guys with guns, and they dropped them right across the creek from us, and they came onto our property. They actually never arrested anybody or even took anything. They were mostly young people, college kids that had been hired for the summer and didn't know what they were doing, certainly weren't police or mean or anything like that. But at any rate, it was intimidating. There were helicopters flying almost every day, circling, so this went on, and like I said, though, the kids were old enough, and so people started to want to move into town, and they had the money to buy. Some of the people had money to buy homes in town, and so again, not to say all the women, but a number of the women started to move into town. And, there's more to do in town. I mean, come on, and that caused a split up in a lot of families. So I found myself ending up living in Fire Creek with a bunch of old single guys. Well, we weren't old at that point, but single guys. And so it was really different. It was really different. And one of the things, so then things started manifesting in town from our culture. The health center was begun in Redway, not in the buildings that they are in now, in the building that just burned down, the old laundromat building. And KMUD was started in Garberville, in those little houses. I think there's still a few of those cottages up at the south end of town. And Jim Eckadall, Deerhawk, my friend and brother, became the first program manager, or general manager, and he was also a poet. Jim was a poet. I was writing poetry. Other people were doing poetry at the time. Paul Ensimer, and so Deerhawk started a show called Voices of the Bard, and the Bard, the poet, and that's the first time I started to be on KMUD. And anyway, KMUD blossomed, the health center blossomed, then the Mateel Center, the reggae on the river continued to grow, the momentum there. And so the Mateel Center was built. So all this started manifesting in town. And the whole economy in Humboldt County became funded by the black market of southern Humboldt, northern Mendocino County. And the merchants in Eureka and Arcata really appreciated the business. People started buying new vehicles. People started buying new clothes. People started buying new tools. Businesses started opening in Garberville. Everyone in Humboldt County was benefiting. But the bureaucrats couldn't see that. They couldn't be satisfied with that. So what they did was they pushed for legalization. Some of the hippies had that mentality also. They wanted legalization. And we knew what that meant. Legalization means control. And so not all of us supported that.